Yeah, sure, absolutely. It's always a pleasure.
as well.
Okay. It says we're live. I'm just going to give it a few seconds just to, because I don't see it popping up on my YouTube. And showtime, we are live, people. Good morning, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Welcome to another episode of Kiko's Freethinkers Forum. This is episode 145, and we're joined by two guests. They're seven-time guests, both of them. I did not plan it this way. Trust me, it just happened organically. Believe me, audience. We have S.L. Kanthan. He's a columnist for Sputnik India. He's based out of Bangalore, India. As I said, he's on the show seven different times. We've discussed multipolarity, BRICS, which is going to be part of the discussion today. Obviously, the 16th BRICS Summit that just happened in Kazan, Russia. And we're also joined by Dr. Jack Rasmus, and he's also been on the show seven different times. He's the author of several different books. We've discussed some of those books, two of them in particular, Scourge of Neoliberalism, and we've made allusions to systemic fragility in the global economy. And he has just so many different books that he's written about in the past, and he's working on the forthcoming book right now. And he's also a radio show host, a weekly program called Alternative Visions that's part of the Progressive Radio Network. I just want to welcome both of the gentlemen back to the show, and I can't wait to have this discussion today.
My pleasure.
Pleasure to be with you and your guests and audience, Kiko.
I appreciate it, and this is kind of unconventional. I don't know how we want to start this today. Brief ad before we start. If you all are following Kiko's Freethinkers Forum, it doesn't cost you anything to subscribe to us. It doesn't cost you a dime, just a little bit of your time to expand your mind. And remember, you can't unthink free thought. And I'm just really proud of just the way this has grown over the last year and a half. And we continue to grow. We're fully monetized. We're available in pretty much every country in the world. 42% of our audience is located outside of the United States. So this discussion is very appropriate considering the type of audience that I have and the type of people that I like to connect and communicate with. As far as I'm concerned, I want to let you gentlemen kind of take control of the conversation about BRICS. I'm more or less hosting. I'm going to definitely give my input, but I'm just curious, what were some of your biggest takes from the BRICS conference? It doesn't matter who starts, but what were some of your biggest takeaways from it?
Well, if you want me to start, I'll go ahead, throw it, and then I'm sure SL will join us here. Well, the first impression I got was the comprehensiveness of the declaration. You know, there is a published declaration with like over 100 clauses to it, and it's very comprehensive. It's not just about a financial alternative architecture. I think it's broader than that, and that's really about setting up almost a separate global economy within the global economy. And the second thing is it is written very carefully. The first 60 or so clauses are about kind of like a mission statement for the BRICS, you might say. And then they get into the details of some of the institutional changes. But it's very comprehensive, and the statement is very careful to say, well, we're not immediately here an alternative to the G7, G8, global economic empire, the US, whatever you want to call it. We want to work with you. I don't know if this is just tactical on their part, a strategic tactical on the BRICS part, but it's very, very clever, very smart of them to do that. And they're sort of also saying, well, U.S. and West, this is your last chance to work with us. Come on and let's cooperate. Cooperate not just at the UN level, but WTO and IMF and others are all referenced in the statement, and they're saying, the BRICS is saying, this is we want to work with you, cooperate with you, and kind of it's your last chance. If not, we're just going to go our own way, and whatever happens. So that not immediate break is another indication of something in the declaration. So the comprehensiveness, the offer to cooperate, but bottom line, it's setting up a set of dual institutions to the West. I mean, you can't deny that, and it's kind of like dual power within the system. And whenever you see dual power, you got a kind of a revolution brewing. It's kind of like the medieval bourgeois parliaments being set up within the aristocracy, and that eventually led, of course, to the displacement of the medieval institutions with the bourgeois institutions. Well, this is kind of the same thing, I think. So those would be my initial takes on the declaration and where the BRICS are at present. They're adding immediately like 13 countries, pretty comprehensive. 4 from Southeast Asia, very important countries. Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand, and then you've got a couple in Latin America, Bolivia, Cuba. I'm sure pretty soon Venezuela will probably join. And then Africa, several countries, including Nigeria and Algeria. And then some of the former USSR Central Asian countries, Kazakhstan, others. So it's a pretty comprehensive and challenging and revolutionary declaration, and it's only begun. I think this thing has some distance to go, and you watch the U.S. elections, and what do you see? You see these two candidates not saying a word about this at all. I don't know if it's too complex for them or they're too dumb. Probably a little bit of both. This is the biggest challenge to the U.S. Empire, the U.S. economy. Domestically as well, we can talk about how this is going to blow back on the domestic economy. But not a word about it. And this is the biggest challenge, bigger than even the wars that they're facing, I believe.
Yeah, absolutely. Kiko, I think you are on mute.
Yeah, you're on mute. You're on
No,
mute.
we still cannot hear you.
Yeah. No.
You can hear me now.
Okay, now we can hear you.
Okay, I think some of it has to do with the headset, but we have several questions and comments already, but we're going to let SL get his takeaways from the BRICS conference before some of these interesting questions and comments already coming in.
Sure. So, if you look at the big picture, there were 36 countries representing more than half the world's population. Okay, that is huge. So basically, half the world's population are saying that we're not happy with the US-led world order. And this is something that the US elites, the think tanks, media, politicians, they all have to wonder why, because they live in this delusion that the US fake rules-based order, there are no rules, but they still just keep saying, rules-based order. So there's a rules-based order, their freedom and democracy. It's all fake and it's not working for a majority of the nations and the people around the world. So, that is the big, the tectonic transformations that are happening in real time. Now, BRICS is slow in its process, because a lot of people were hoping that there would be like a grain exchange system fully established, or the BRICS currency. So none of that sort, there was nothing major in terms of concrete, tangible products were announced. There's no alternative to SWIFT. There's no alternative to the US dollar and all the stuff. So, but that will happen. They're just not moving forward in a faster direction. But they probably want to get enough members and to build a consensus, because it's not like the Bretton Woods or the G7 where the US says, jump, and all the others say, yes, sir, how high. So this one is more democratic, and then there's a lot of, like the one big thing, the one big achievement, tangible achievement, was the détente between India and China. So that was huge. So now you have 3 billion people willing to work together and to do more trade, manufacturing, blah, blah, blah. So this is going to be huge for both the two countries and Asia and BRICS. So similarly, some of the friction, so like there's a lot of rumors about BRICS because they don't have like an official spokesperson. Okay, they don't have a freaking website. They don't have a social media account. They don't have a spokesperson. They don't have an office. So this they really need to fix. So like there are some random X accounts who are like pretending to be the official BRICS. Like there's this one stupid account called BRICS Info, and they just say things, okay, without any proof, without any links, without any official documentation. They just make the claims, and people all around the world, they start to repeat that, okay. So like this is the stupidity of people who don't know how to read and how to analyze things, okay. So they just see something, and then they just repeat it. So that like, there's no critical thinking. So for example, like there are these websites or the magazines from Malaysia using this account to say that Malaysia has become a new partner member of BRICS. But there's no statement from the Malaysian government or Putin or the Russian government. So it's pretty frustrating. So I'll go into that later on my suggestions on how BRICS can become more organized and more efficient.
Well, you've already answered a viewer question, and we're going to see if Dr. Rasmus has a response. So Arma, shout out to Arma. I read your tweet about BRICS not having an official website, social media account. Is that correct? And SL just stated that just now. Do you have any comment or response to what SL was talking about, Jack?
Yeah, well, I think he's correct. This is a blueprint. The declaration is a blueprint. It's not a done deal. I think that if the BRICS had defined everything in some detail, it might turn off some people. I think by leaving it sort of a blueprint of where they're going, it's an incentive for other countries to join in some capacity, to have a voice in how these institutions get defined. So I think there's a tactical purpose to not defining it in all the details, but it's very clear that there is a blueprint. There is an alternative to SWIFT that's suggested there. Probably will evolve out of China's or Russia's alternative, but it's going to be in local currencies, the trade initially. But if you're going to trade in local currencies, you need a clearinghouse of some sort. You need an IMF-like institution to rebalance imbalances in currencies. There's a development bank, the new development bank, and maybe a multilateral development bank coming out of this. So there's alternatives to the IMF and the World Bank already discussed. But I think they're trying to go slow so that they give people a voice and an incentive, people, the countries here, right, to come and join. But it's very clear where their thinking is going, and I believe I've heard different statements of 30 countries have applied. I don't know what applying means actually, and some say as many as 80 are interested. It's hard to define what the membership is, the partnerships of various degrees here. But I think, it's pretty clear where they're going. It's just the pace at which they'll be going. That's in question here.
Yeah. And, the U.S. Still has a lot of power, right? So they put a lot of pressure on these countries to say, don't go to BRICS conference, don't become a member. Like Mexico wanted to become a member 2 years ago, and that went nowhere. So the U.S. is working behind the scene to sabotage BRICS as much as possible. So you look at, like, say, Reuters. They publish, the articles like, BRICS should just disband. There's no point in having BRICS. So they spread fake news, they spread disinformation, and I'm sure that behind the scene, for example, like the U.S. ambassador to India, he gave a speech a few months ago, and he just bluntly warned, like a mafia guy would do. Like if you watch The Sopranos or The Godfather, Blinken, he talks like that. He's like, the ambassador, Garcetti. So he's like, let me tell you something. There's no such thing as strategic autonomy. Okay, so like India should not try to have a strategic autonomy, because when there is a conflict, there's no a strategic autonomy. You have to take a side. So like, but this is their attitude, right? Like if you are not at the table, then you are on the menu. It's a very barbaric diplomacy.
Well, one of the things that have really changed, if I just comment on that, the BRICS couldn't do this 40 years ago, in the 80s or whatever, because these countries weren't as developed as they are now. A lot has happened in the last 40 years, and the rise of neoliberalism in the 80s, right, which reestablished U.S. hegemony here globally that was kind of shaken by the 1970s events. I've written about that, as you know, Kiko. But today, these countries are far more developed economically, and that's why they want to go more independently, and they want more of a voice. They've been knocking on the G20 and the other doors here, wanting a bigger voice. And of course, the U.S. says, no, we're not going to give you a bigger voice, or they do it. They dribble out more of a participation in their institutions little by little, right? But these countries want more of a voice, and they're not getting it. And that's the impetus behind it. They are more developed now, which means that the U.S. cannot threaten them the way they used to. The empire used to, with soft power or political instability or denying them dollars and economic instability. They are more immune, not totally, but relatively more immune to those kinds of overtures by the empire. And they want a different voice. And then, of course, the events of the last couple of years have just reinforced all that. And that is when they've weaponized the dollar, right, with the sanctions. That's what's happened. And it's kind of a shot across the bow for these countries that, look, if you don't play ball with us, we're going to throw these sanctions at you. And there's public sanctions and there's private sanctions. that's kind of a warning to them as well. Secondary sanctions, which the Biden administration has been creeping towards here, which means sanctions on countries, not just Russia and China, but countries that do business with them. Uh, and that sort of accelerated the whole awareness by the global South that, hey, the bully is trying to bully us even more. And we're not going to be bullied as much as we used to be in the past because we don't have to be. I mean, that's a significant thing. The world has moved on, and the global South is not as vulnerable as it used to be to the empire's uh, threats and intimidation.
Right.
Uh, I have to get this in before SL. I just got a comment. Is this Kiko censorship for my comments have been erased? No, absolutely not. Shout out to Prester John. I'm pretty sure they're a public subscriber. Shout out. No, I'm going to get to your questions. They're just other questions in the column. Now I'm looking at them. We're going to share those questions for sure. We're going to get to Prester John's concerns and statements in a second. I'm going to let SL because he had a thought, and after that, I'm going to get to some of these comments in the chat.
Yeah, no, I was just going to reflect upon Jack's comments about how the world has changed and there is less dependency on the U.S. and it's happening across all dimensions. So, for example, if you take, the African countries before 2008, uh, the whole continent of Africa used to trade more with the US than with China. And then fast forward to now, uh, so now the trade with China is like 5 times, I believe, 5 times larger than Africa's trade with the US. Right, and then there's this famous chart diagram from The Economist. Who you gonna call, and then you look at the countries for whom. So if you look at the countries which traded with the U.S. more than China, right, and then so you look at the world map, pretty much everyone traded more with the US than with China in year 2000. And then you fast forward to like 2017, it's completely flipped, right? So now like 90% of the countries, they trade more with China than with the US, right? And as it's not just in the lower end now, right? China has moved up the value chain. So they are number one in the world in terms of the medium high tech, and they are number one in the world in terms of the high tech goods. So although the high tech goods, it's the sometimes the trade numbers are misleading because if China does an export of, say, the iPhones, it's not really fully made in China, right? Like they're just doing the assembly. But China has, China can pretty much do whatever the U.S. can do in terms of products, right? They can make washing machines, television, uh, tractors, buses, trains. Okay, so maybe not. I mean, the airplanes yet, but shipbuilding. China's shipbuilding is like 200 times larger than the shipbuilding capacity of the U.S. So whatever they need, people can pretty much work with China, and China doesn't bug you about freedom, democracy, human rights, gay rights. Oh, if you don't talk to your children about LGBTQ, we will not build you a power dam in Sudan. They don't say that. Like, man, you do what you want to do. We want to do business with you, and so you can evolve in your own way. So that kind of policy is really beneficial. And also, China doesn't sanction countries. They don't force countries to do or to not to do something. You know, like you don't see China going to other countries and say you should not, use the American Cisco. You should not buy servers from Dell or HP. You should not use Google search, right? Like they don't tell countries what to do, but that's exactly what the US does, right? Like Mike Pompeo went all around the world and he forced countries to ban Huawei. You know why? And then, the US tells Japan and the Netherlands to not to let their private enterprises sell certain semiconductor products to China. And they tell Samsung in South Korea to not make chips for the Chinese companies. So, like, this is all against the WTO. This is all against free trade. This is all against common sense. I mean, if some other country does that to the U.S., man, like people will be so pissed off, right? Like, I can imagine, Russia telling, I don't know, but Congo to not send cobalt to the U.S. How ridiculous would that be? Right? So, but that's what is happening. So, but now countries around the world, as Jack said, they have more freedom, they have more autonomy, and they get more self confidence as they get richer. And if you look at the cross border transactions, right, payments and receipts in China, 54% of the cross border transactions are happening in the Chinese yuan, right? So in like 2010, if you go back to 2010, just 14 years ago, the yuan's share was basically zero. It was all like 95% dollar. And now uh, yuan has surpassed the US dollar in China. And Russia is conducting 97% of its trade in non dollar currencies.
You're speaking a lot of Jack's language, I'm sure, with the economic talk, which is, I'm sure we're going to get back to those realities and kind of contextualize that within BRICS as far as the economic angle is concerned. But I have to get these statements in. Prester John, shout out to Prester John again. Trust me, we don't want to censor anybody. We're under censorship ourselves. So that's the last thing I want to do is censor people's ideas and statements. So I'm going to give the statements first and then some of the questions. So BRICS is neoliberalism with a splash of color to give the impression of change. This is not anti-imperialism. And then Prester continues, again, the statements first and then the actual questions. Wall Street is not the least bit concerned with BRICS because it maintains the same economic rule structure as garden variety Western capitalism. And this is still Prester John continuing. BRICS nations are using private mercenary forces across Africa in their efforts to secure resources. And then some of the questions that Prester poses. One here, BRICS advocates for free trade zones across the global south. How is this advantageous to workers, national sovereignty, and the environment? That's one question. And now I'm going to let you all address the second question here. And then I think there's a third question. This follow-up question is BRICS nations have implemented more World Economic Forum policies than Western nations themselves. The World Economic Forum is an overtly fascist think tank. How is this worthy of praise or a sign of positive change? SL or Jack, some pretty interesting questions posed.
Well, I would just say to that series of questions that if you're trying to go independent economically, there are certain things you got to do, regardless if you are part of the empire or you're part of the challenge to the empire. I mean, it's just economics. You can't get around the fact that you need a global clearinghouse for currencies, right? You can't get around the fact you need a messaging system if you're going to trade goods, or a payment system if you're going to trade goods. Yeah, it's going to be reflective of the empire's institutions, because that's economics. Whether you're in one camp or another camp. I mean, you can't not parallel institutions if you're going to trade and have money flows, investment flows between countries, and have currencies and so forth. So, just to say that the BRICS are doing the same thing doesn't mean it's imperialism. It means it's anti-imperialism, because no one's being enforced. No one's being intimidated by the BRICS. That's the big difference. S.L just described the what happened in the ambassadors in India and so forth. The U.S. empire runs on intimidation, especially in its latter stages here, when others are trying to go more independent. The U.S. is intimidating the hell and turning the screws, weaponizing the dollar, and so forth. And when that doesn't work, of course, it destabilizes a country with regime change and so forth, or runs proxy wars. You don't see the BRICS doing that at this particular point. Of course, they're just emerging. But it's very voluntary. And in fact, you read the declaration, a lot of these institutions you want to participate, they emphasize is voluntary. Right? You can use our currencies or use your currencies. Who cares? Right? So if you look at the behaviors going on right now, it's not anti-imperialist. A lot of it is voluntary. And that's, when you see the voluntarism here rather than intimidation, it means it's not imperialism. Yeah, it's international cooperation, but international cooperation is not identical with imperialism. Imperialism is force, soft force, economic force, political force, military force. That's what imperialism is, to the advantage of the core home empire, the G7, G8, US, Five Eyes, whatever you want to call them, right? I would take issue with some of those statements, because they're kind of implying basically that, there's no difference between the BRICS and the empire. Well, there is.
S.L, do you have
and
anything?
also, Prester John mentioned the word neoliberalism. No, BRICS is not about neoliberalism. They don't come and say that you have to privatize your water, media, electricity, corporations, and have Russia and China take over your entire system. They don't say that. So it's not about privatization. It's not about austerity. It's not about the global corporatocracy. So this is not neoliberalism. They want countries to have a thriving manufacturing sector, thriving development, the infrastructure, right? Neoliberalism does not build highways and railways and seaports and airports and provide TV to villagers in Africa. No, that's not how neoliberalism works. You look at what China does. They go and build hospitals. Okay, they build schools. They build stadiums. They build parks, mosques, theater, parliament building for governments, solar farms. And then power. The hydropower dams. So when was the last time the IMF, World Bank, Wall Street, BlackRock did any of those projects? Never. So it's wrong to say BRICS is imperialism. It's wrong to say BRICS is neoliberalism. Yeah, it's about globalization, right? Because every country has its own strengths and weaknesses. No one country can do it all. So, but every country has to work together. But the key is, are you going to work together as partners, as I mean, the equals, right? That's the key. And as Jack said, are you doing it voluntarily? And are you doing it as partners? And are you doing it based on building consensus? Are you doing it without color revolutions, assassinations, wars, bribes, blackmail, the Lolita Island of Jeffrey Epstein? Those are all the bad ways to get things done.
If I could
Okay.
just add a comment to that on identifying what's going on with the BRICS with neoliberalism. As you know, Kiko, I've written extensively on neoliberalism. And basically, neoliberalism in its external policies, in other words, trade policy, currency policy, so forth, is really imperialism. You see, the concept of neoliberalism was created by academics as I believe, to some extent, as a cover for imperialism policies. There are four major policies to neoliberalism. Domestically, of course, neoliberalism was about, in the 70s and 80s when it occurred, was really about taming domestic opposition, the unions and social movements and so forth. But globally, it was about bringing to heel challenges to U.S. global hegemony, whether that was Japan Inc. or whether the Europeans or Soviet Union. That's what the trade policies and the currency policies and the balance of payments policies of the U.S. in the 80s was really about. So, you think of neoliberalism as a set of policies, as I've described, four sets. I won't go into the detail. Four sets of policies, which globally is really the latest iteration of imperialism, and domestically about using fiscal, monetary, industrial policies to tame unions and the working class and the social movements. That's what neoliberalism is. But you don't see those domestic policies. You don't see manipulation of fiscal, monetary, industrial policies in the BRICS Declaration. It's really about external policies and relations between states economically, having to do with goods flows and money flows and investment and currencies.
Well, I appreciate those explanations, and I'm sure we're going to come back to some of the similar topics that we've already discussed, because we have another comment. Shout out to, again, Prester John. We appreciate the questions and the comments. We love to encourage discussion and disagreements and everything else. Voices of Poverty Project. Shout out to Anthony and Voices of Poverty Project. Is there a reason to believe BRICS countries won't rely on the same techniques every resource-based system uses, especially the oppression of people in their lands to extract these resources? And then he follows up. I'd argue the people of the Congo used to extract the cobalt to send to Russia are pretty intimidated by the BRICS movement. They aren't nobody. Do you all have any response to those two concerns, kind of in the same vein as Prester?
Well, I would just add, the point that both S.L. and I are making, that this is a voluntary membership organization, the BRICS. No one's intimidating anybody. And if you want to join, you will negotiate with the BRICS and accept the terms and conditions or not. You don't have to. And each country will, make that determination, whether it's to their advantage to join the BRICS and or join the BRICS and continue working with the Global Eight, which I think a lot of countries are going to do. They're going to play both ends against the middle. They're going to participate in the BRICS, and that doesn't mean that they're going to, leave the Global Eight institutions and so forth. They're going to participate in both. There'll be a long period where a lot of countries will participate in both, and even the main countries are saying, main countries meaning the original BRICS and those just now joining, are saying that the BRICS doesn't mean we won't remain part of the global institutions of Bretton Woods ever since 1944, we will. We'll participate in both. I don't see the intimidation there in the arrangement.
Yeah, so it's about, so it's not saying, like the US would say, don't trade with China, don't use BRICS currency, right? Like Trump, said, if you're going to go away from dollar, I'm going to put 100% tariffs on your goods, right? So BRICS doesn't say that, so BRICS doesn't say you must stop using the US dollar. You must stop being friends with America. You must kick military bases out of your country, right? They don't say that. They're like, no, well, listen, we're just giving you an option. So, well, if you can just trade in your local currencies, it's more efficient. You don't have to pay commission to the US dollar, and you don't have to be bullied by the US, which can say, if you don't do what I'm telling you to do, I'm going to sanction and I'm going to cripple your economy and corporations, right? Because the US sanctions can mean like the death knell for corporations and for the economies. So BRICS is not about that. They're just saying we are going to give you the option to do other things. But if you are a BRICS member, you cannot follow the sanction regime of the US. Okay, so BRICS members cannot impose sanctions on each other, and they should not obey the American sanctions. So that's like one of the major the criteria. It's like thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal. It's like the BRICS commandments. Thou shalt not sanction, thou shalt not wage wars, thou shalt not do regime change operations in your friendly members. Those kinds of stuff.
I would just add that we're talking about sanctions. When you participate within the global eight, the U.S. empire, well, you use the dollar, right? That was the condition of being part of the empire. You trade with the dollar. You got to buy dollars if you want to buy oil or energy or medical goods or whatever. But when you're using the dollar, the main sanction is the U.S. Takes action to prevent you from accumulating dollars so that you can buy oil and energy or medical goods or food or whatever. I mean, a good example is what happened to Venezuela, right? The U.S. Started putting the screws on Venezuela by cutting off its access to dollars in various ways that I won't get into. Well, that's what happens when you depend on the dollar. That's how the U.S. Intimidates you, and how the U.S. Puts pressure on you to do what it wants, whether it's what it wants economically, or what it wants politically, and that's the threat that is really the shot against the bow, across the bow here to a lot of the global South. They see how the U.S. in the 21st century is resorting more and more to sanctions as part of its global policies. I mean, sanctions have existed in the U.S. since Cuba, since the late 50s, 60s, right? But the use of sanctions has really accelerated, I think, in proportion to the weakening of the U.S. Global relations and its economic rule here in the 21st century. More and more, it's a marker of the decline, the weakening of the empire here, to resort to sanctions in policies. But the sanctions are really, they take many forms, but the main form is to just deprive countries of the access to dollars, which ruins their economy. And that's what happens when you trade just with dollars, or, since 1974, the agreement has been with Saudi Arabia and OPEC countries that oil will be purchased, bought, and sold just in dollars. Right. So that's why you got to move to either your alternative currency or in the interim now trading in your own national currencies.
Yeah. So, something like 60% of the countries around the world, they are under some form of US sanctions. It's so ridiculous. And then they also use the sanctions to steal assets, okay? They will steal your foreign exchange reserves, they will steal your gold, they will seize your assets, the corporate assets, they will steal your real estate, your yachts, whatever, So, like they would allow all these the elites from all over the world to buy real estate in, say, New York City, Miami, London, And these guys are like, wow, this is, like this great opportunity for, the investment. And my kids can go to college in the US, you know, uh, London, Oxford, whatever. But then those are also the traps for the elites around the world, right? So like you have the relatives of presidents and prime ministers and the foreign ministers all over the world. They live in the U.S. or they buy real estate in Manhattan, whatever. But at the moment they misbehave, those assets will be
Frozen.
seized. Those assets will be gone. So it's like the carrot and stick, And same thing with all these the offshore accounts, right? In like Panama, Monaco, Caribbean, whatever, and all these places, they put trillions and trillions of dollars, like literally, like tens of trillions of dollars are hidden in these offshore accounts. And at the moment, if somebody misbehaves, they don't obey the globalists, the Goldman Sachs, and the BlackRock of the world, that money will be gone.
We have more follow up from Preston John, making kind of the point about economics and the natural resource element, because that's something we're going to get to as well. A lot of these BRICS countries, they're very much resource based nations. I mean, and I think there's a top 10 list. There's a graphic that I was looking at that shows just the composition of some of these countries when it comes to natural resources. But Prester continues, the largest cobalt mining companies in DRC, Congo, the Democratic Republic of Congo, are Chinese, forced and child labor use to extract these minerals. China was already caught bribing Congolese political officials. And then they continue, is this okay? How is this okay? And then if nations do not pay back these loans, um, they have to give up this infrastructure and strategic mining rights. Talking about China again, as far as the exploitation of labor, child labor, and kind of questioning this idea of China not being anything but capitalistic. It's basically a capitalistic country. Russia and China are capitalist nations. Capitalism does not do things through voluntarism. And then Preston continues, China has privatized large sectors of their own economy. These are hard facts. Any response to that? Pretty harsh criticisms of China and the
I
government.
mean, so a lot of this is just, when it comes to China, people just say ridiculous things, Has Prester John actually been to Congo? Does he know about all these the mining companies and arrangements? Has he read the contracts to see who owns how much? You know, yes, I'm sure. There's going to be a lot of the abuse in these the mining sectors. But I see abuse in my own country. Like in India. Like you see farmers get abused by landlords. A lot of people are forced to work. Okay, we're all forced to work. Okay, so like 90% of the people in the world they would not go to work if they had like $1 million in the bank. Okay, so do you think all the people who are working at Walmart, Macy's, Bank of America, the Amazon warehouse, or even like say bankers, accountants, lawyers, who the hell wants to go to work? So like, do you think a lawyer wants to go to work every day? No, like you give him $10 million, he's not gonna go near the courthouse for the rest of his life. So to just say random things like, "Oh, people are abused in Congo," yes, there's going to be abuse, but the people work, they need job, and yeah, like, we should also think about ways to make these things less strenuous and dangerous. you know so like these people, so for example, China is developing robots and 5G stuff and robots, so that the workers can actually sit inside a building, like this, like in a chair. You sit and you're able to control the robots that work inside the mines. Okay, so like those are the ways we can use science to make life better for those people. And then hopefully 40 years from now, very very few people, and especially children, should not be working, like they should be going to school. So those things, they could happen in the future. But once you talk about the robots, okay, some guy on social media will say, "Oh my God, robots are going to destroy human life. If robots do all the work, do you ever think about the workers in Congo? How will they survive without mining jobs? The Chinese robots, they destroyed the life of the Congo workers." So like there's no win-win here. People will just find something to whine about, right? So, but we should uh, but talk about real issues and of how to help those workers. So maybe we like they can set limits, right? Like you work for only maximum of 10 years at these mines, and you should retire at the age of 40. And the mining company should give you a basic house and some living accommodation, because you really don't want 40-year-olds to be working in the mines, right? So like there are like humanitarian and pragmatic solutions we can look into.
Well, I would just add, the thread of questioning from this one viewer is obviously very ideological. He kind of says, "Oh, capitalism is exploitive." Well, of course it's exploitive, and therefore Russia and China are capitalist. Therefore, Russia and China are as exploitive as the U.S. Without looking at the particulars of the relationships of foreign investment. I mean, you don't see China having an IMF that goes in with the banks, private banks right behind it, that goes into Argentina and says, "Well, you've got a currency crisis here. If you want more money from us, you got to show us you're going to be able to pay back the interest on the loans we give you that we roll over here. And therefore, we want you to end subsidies on your domestic economy, and we want you to raise taxes, and we want you to squeeze your workers more to create more of a surplus to pay back us bankers." And that's going on all the time with the IMF and the empire. And the same thing with the World Bank. You get these project loans, but only if American companies can build the project, or American companies will get the flow back of the resources from the project. I mean, that's exploitation in specifics. You can go country by country, the U.S. empire and its institutions, and you can see that kind of exploitation. Yeah, capitalism is exploitive, and the U.S. is the core empire, so it's exploiting a hell of a lot more than China, and certainly not Russia. China is investing, and in many cases, it's foregoing loans when a country gets in trouble here and can't pay back. But China just couldn't throw money around and not expect it to be paid back. I mean, that's a waste of money capital, and other countries could use it in the project. So, these generalized statements are very ideological. Let's talk specifics if you want to. And I think we ought to get on to more specifics about the economy and BRICS here, rather than spending our time justifying ideological statements from one member of the audience.
Well, I wanted to at least acknowledge those comments because, and some of the follow-up stuff, I knew it sounded like Cobalt Red because I've read Cobalt Red. As a matter of fact, right here, yes, I've read Cobalt Red, Prester. I actually tried to get Mr. Carr on the show 4 different times, and he never responded. So I understand where you're coming from, and it's one of those things where I think somebody is definitely going to be exploited. But we're at a point now where there's a certain hegemony that needs to be accounted for before we can get to other centers, because we know where the main center of this axis is. And I think that's part of the reason why BRICS is important. And it just, sometimes things are negotiable. We have to negotiate some things. Sometimes there is exploitation, unfortunately. But at the same time, we have to deal with some of the immediate consequences that are part of this same system. This is an interconnected world. Even with the United States unilateral type of way of governing, the world is still going to be connected some kind of a way. Like we've said before, with the pipelines and everything else, Russian oil has still been pumped into Europe. So it's not like they can sanction people all they want to do, but these economies are still going to be linked regardless of what these people decide to do. And, the people do suffer in every country, whether it's this country or Russia or anywhere else. The working class people are always taking the brunt of that exploitation. That's how it works, unfortunately.
Yeah. Sorry, so you have to be, so like, this is like a logical fallacy, okay? Because if you use this kind of logical fallacy, there's no difference between a tiger and a cat, then you can use all kinds of things to say, yeah, it's all the same, what is the difference between a tiger and a cat in your home? It's all cat, small cat, big cat, but there's no difference. So,
okay, but no, I at least want to acknowledge some of those questions, and I'm sure more will come in. But I was curious too about, as far as BRICS is concerned, isn't there like a point where there's just too many members? Because I'm thinking, I know that there's a ton of interest in BRICS, but I think I've talked to SL about this. At some point, is there like a line of demarcation when it comes to BRICS? Like some of these countries just can never be a part of BRICS. Like where's the line drawn?
Europe. G7, G8. The BRICS don't want G7, G8. G8 would be adding Australia and New Zealand, which is part of the G7, really, de facto. And they weren't invited to the Kazan conference, of course, because, they are the core. They are the core of the empire, and the 5 Anglo countries are the core of the core, you might say. So they weren't invited. They would probably just disrupt the whole thing, and particularly in backroom meetings. So that's kind of the dividing line. But apart from that, I think it's kind of totally open right now, at least for whoever wants to join, countries who want to join the BRICS.
If SL doesn't have a response to that, I was curious, when is Argentina going to officially join? I know that Malay is in office now, but don't you think eventually Argentina is going to be a BRICS member state too?
Yeah, but hopefully there will be a leftist, progressive leader after freaking Millet, and then they'll get their sense back and they will join. But BRICS is voluntary, right? So some countries will just come and go. In January, Millet is going to go to China. Okay. So this guy during the election was like so anti-communist, anti-China. He called China a thug nation, blah blah blah. Just to get votes. And now he cannot survive without the Chinese yuan, without the, you know, they have the currency swap agreement with China, and now he's shutting the F up, and he's gonna go to China,
Oh, he
and
is.
yeah, in January, and he's going to kiss Xi Jinping's, the gold ring and say, "Forgive me, Father, for I have sinned. It was just a moment of delusion due to the election. I had a couple of wine glasses too much." You know.
Well, I'm sure that Millet is not making this decision all on his own. I'm sure there behind him are a number of Argentine capitalists who are saying, "Are you crazy? I mean, we can get cheaper things from China. You better go and talk with them." And he says, "Okay, you know." I don't think he's ideologically predisposed to cooperate with China, but I think the real sources of influence behind him, the capitalists in Argentina, are saying, "Get real."
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, like if the Argentinians want washing machines and dryers and ovens and microwaves and the auto parts and the Wi-Fi routers, where are they going to go to? I mean, are they going to, buy a Wi-Fi router from the US? No. They're going to go to China. And so like that is the reality. And then if say Argentina wants to build highways to link some mining town to the airport, if Argentina wants to build a seaport, okay, who's going to build a seaport? Okay, the U.S. is not going to build a seaport. The U.S. cannot build anything anymore, so they have to go to China. So you cannot live without China these days. And why not? I mean, who cares if somebody has communism, capitalism, socialism, Islamic Republic? Who the hell cares? I mean, but you want to take care of your country, and you want to take care of your people, and you want to move forward, and that's the goal. Why does it bother? So the people are like so freaking but open-minded about sexual perversion. Okay, like you can do all kinds of crazy stuff, satanic stuff with sexuality and whatever. Like John Podesta has like statues of children being murdered by a serial killer, right in his, I mean, the living room. Okay. And Rothschilds are like posing with all kinds of satanic drawings. That doesn't bother people. But if somebody has communism, like people get their panties all bunched up, they get so worked up. How does that affect you? Like you should be worrying about your people, your country, about your economy, your the infrastructure. Do you have 5G? I mean, are you able to provide free public education for your children? Are you able to provide health care? That kind of stuff should be worried about. like, rather than worrying about the political, economic, religious systems in some other countries.
Yeah, good points made for sure. I was there was a lot that happened at the 16th BRICS Summit in Kazan, Russia, and there was a lot that was made about Lula's absence. Did you all pick up on that? Because I know that there was a lot of chatter about Brazil's changed its stance. Is there any credibility to this? Is there any concern with that?
Well, I think it's whose media are you getting that message from, right? I
I
mean,
I
we're
read
gonna
a,
get
I
a
read a
lot.
compilation of articles and it came to the same conclusion. That's the reason why I'm asking.
Well, it's hard to tell what what are the differences and disagreements within the BRICS. Of course, there's going to be, but it's pretty clear. Certain countries within the BRICS are stronger on well, let's cooperate with the West and its institutions than other countries.
Hmm.
So there's going to be differences within the BRICS on to what extent you keep dealing with the West. I think Brazil is one of those countries that's, the internal politics in Brazil is pretty much balanced. It could go either way, and I think Lula, is trying to be a force within the BRICS to try to, let's not challenge the West that much. Let's go slow. Let's cooperate and so forth. Well, that's because Brazil historically has been very susceptible to Western U.S. pressure, right? Other countries less so, China less so. Well, you have those internal politics within the BRICS all the time. I mean, there's nothing strange about that. But the Western media will keep trying to portray the most negative message you can about the BRICS. They're collapsing and so forth. It's kind of like Ukraine, I mean, Ukraine's a democracy and Ukraine's winning the war. If you listen to the Washington Post or the New York Times, right? Well, we know that's not quite true. And you're going to get that. You got to read between the lines when you read the Western media. That's all that is, I think.
Yeah, I think he fell down. So he's pretty old. I think he's like 75 years old or something. So he fell down and hurt his head. But you know, I mean, well, unless something happened in the last 2 or 3 months, he's very pro BRICS. He's very pro China. The last time when he was in Beijing, he said, "I wake up every day and I ask myself, why do we have to use the U.S. dollar to trade with other countries?" So yeah, I think Lula is a good man. If you look at his history, like starting at the age of 17, 18, he was very progressive, leftist, pro-labor. So his whole life, he's a solid guy.
As far as we talked a little bit earlier about, we know about the Kazan Declaration, and there was a theme at the BRICS strengthening multilateralism of just global development and security. Now, we understand that there are threats out there. When we talk about just the chaos around the world right now with these wars, the perpetual wars, so where does BRICS fall into this context of perpetual wars? Has BRICS made a stance at all, whether it was an individual member state or as a collective, about just what's going on in Palestine, for instance, and what is the plan going forward with this imminent threat of not just the U.S. deciding to go to expand NATO even more, but also just with the conflicts in the Middle East?
Well, as I said at the my initial statement here, the declaration's very comprehensive, and the first 60 or so clauses, the mission statement, does make reference to all these political instabilities occurring around the world. pretty much comes out on the side of the Palestinians and calls for a ceasefire, and a whole number of other areas. It talks about global political situations, and pretty much calls for reform of the UN and the WTO and the IMF to be more inclusive, to allow the global South to have a bigger voice in it, and talks about these political crises, the wars in particular, and how they need to be resolved through cooperation and diplomacy and discussion. But that doesn't mean that the BRICS as an organization is going to jump into these conflicts and take a stance and demands and list demands and so forth. It's just part of the statement that look, the global West and the U.S. You're not allowing the rest of the world to have a equal voice or more of a voice even, and you're intimidating the rest of the world. This is not the empire of the 80s. This is the 21st century, and you should change your whole attitude and your practices and behaviors, and cooperate. That's the message, and politically as well as economically. It's not by accident the UN the General Secretary Guterres was invited to the BRICS conference, and pretty much said that we need to reform the UN to be more inclusive, and in the Security Council and in wherever in the institutions, we need to let the global South in. And the same thing with WTO. WTO was created by the U.S. Or allowed by the U.S. A couple of decades ago, and the whole idea was to give a bigger voice to the global South. Well, it turned out that the U.S. didn't like that bigger voice. The bigger voice meant it didn't always agree with the U.S., and the U.S. then effectively pulled out of the WTO, right? But BRICS are saying, well, let's reform, let's keep the WTO going as it was originally intended. By the way, historically, if you look at the Bretton Woods Agreement, what came out of Bretton Woods, which the institutions of the empire were set up, the dollar became dominant, but you got the IMF that was created and the World Bank that was created as part of Bretton Woods. But the intention of Bretton Woods was to set up a global trade reconciliation organization as well, along the lines of the IMF and the World Bank, where the world would work out the rules of the global trade. But the U.S. Gave that the deep six, right? It didn't. It decided that in the post-war period, the U.S. didn't want to negotiate or discuss give a voice to anybody else, because they were the gorilla on the trade block, and they didn't need anybody else, right? So that we never got a WTO out of the original Bretton Woods. But by the time you got to the 90s, as we've been saying, the rest of the world, the global South, became richer and more independent, and demanded, knocked on the door and says, hey, we want a bigger voice in trade. So the WTO was created. But as I said, the U.S., under Bush and after, didn't like some of the decisions of the WTO, so it's de facto pulled out of it. There's a mechanism in the WTO where disputes are arbitrated between countries, trade disputes, right? Well, some of the arbitrations didn't turn out to the U.S. Liking, so the U.S. sort of backed out of the WTO. It's formally still in it, but the WTO is not really functioning the way it was intended. Well, the BRICS are saying, well, let's make it the way it was intended. So you got to understand the global relationship since Bretton Woods. Bretton Woods set up the institutions of the empire, right? Those institutions over time have weakened, and contradictions have grown within those institutions. But the U.S. response to that was to force the institutions on the rest of the world rather than reform them and let the rest of the world have a bigger voice. And that's really the core of the problems here. and the origins of the BRICS, I believe.
Very well said. And I got to get this question in too, because a frustrating part of when you try to inform the people about not only domestic affairs but world affairs, these things are all they come back full circle. And I don't know if it's just simply people just don't. It's almost like you're supposed to care about your neighbor like you care about your own home. Do people just not care about the rest of the world? Is that just very much a Western imperialist type mindset? And where this question is going is towards SL and to yourself, because I'm going to stay out of this one because we're both living in the States right now. But SL, when you talk to people, do people in India even know what BRICS is? And what is the general response you get with people in India? Are they knowledgeable about BRICS?
Yeah, they know what BRICS is, but in general, there's a lot of misguided concern about China being too powerful in BRICS, And then some of these guys are also like worried about, say, countries like Pakistan or Turkey. But in general, they know the benefit of BRICS, and now more and more the Five Eyes and the U.S. especially are turning this screws on India, right? So the U.S. Staged color revolutions in Sri Lanka, Pakistan, and now in Bangladesh. So they're starting to feel the heat from the U.S. empire. So, but in general, all the think tanks, the media, they're all pretty much in the American pocket, you know. So they're all like puppets who just regurgitate the talking points from, say, Brookings Institution or um, what is it called? The Council on Global. What is it? The CFR, the
Council on Foreign
Council on
Relations.
Foreign. Yeah. So so like in India, there are not many independent thinkers in think tanks and mainstream media, but the foreign minister, Jay Shankar, he keeps talking about multipolar world and how that cannot be stopped. And I think being friends with Russia has a lot of positive impact. And that's why, Modi, as soon as he got elected the third time, the first thing he did was to go to Russia. And the US tried to stop Modi from going to Russia. That didn't happen. And I'm sure the US is not happy with the recent India China rapprochement. So, yeah, people understand the benefits of BRICS, but they just want to straddle, So there's a lot of fear and maybe jealousy towards China because both India and China used to have the same GDP per capita 30 years ago, So you look at the photos of the Chinese towns and cities in 1993, they look the same as in India, right? But now there's like, you know, huge difference, right? Like China is way ahead of the US. And if you go to Chinese cities, man, like Shanghai, Beijing, Shenzhen, Chongqing, it will blow your mind. They're like better than any city in the US or in Europe. So they've advanced so much that India is a little bit afraid because if all the neighbors of India they become very pro-China, then India loses its sphere of influence, And who knows, maybe 20 years from now, there will be Chinese military bases in Nepal, Burma, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh. So there is that fear, and also like a lot of Indians are also like like they have a little bit of, I mean, the imperialist fantasies. They want to have the greater India, like Netanyahu has a dream of the greater Israel. Some Indians have this delusion of a greater India, and so they see China as a geopolitical rival.
Well, in the U.S., I don't think the general populace is aware at all what the BRICS are, even what the acronym represents. And as I said earlier, the politicians, don't seem to understand what's going on, or maybe they're just responding to the lack of interest of the voters to the whole idea of the empire. And generally, Americans aren't as concerned, average Americans, in foreign policy as they are domestic policy. And that's really driving the election right now and the economy and so forth. But I think, the elite within the establishment of, the mainstream, the globalists and their institutions, I think they're aware of what's going on. Within the bureaucracy in the U.S. and the informational network tied to that bureaucracy, they're where it's going on. And once the election's over, you're going to see a real intensification, I think, of the ideological attack on the BRICS here in the mainstream media, both electronic and print here, is going to become more aware, publicly aware. And there will be formulations, I think, among the elite on how to deal with the BRICS now that the Kazan Conference has laid out its direction. So 2025, we will be hearing more about the BRICS, and along with why it's terrible, and quietly behind the scenes, the elite will try to figure out how to deal with it, which will be a combination of trying to bribe the weakest countries to break off, and also intimidating some of the others not to join. The empire will strike back for sure, more aggressively here, starting in 2025. But it's going to be a long process going forward. Of years before the BRICS actually establish, if they ever do, their own single currency. They will trade in currencies, but it's inevitable that if it's going to continue, it's going to have to develop a kind of IMF-like institution to stabilize currencies. It's going to, they already have the rudiments in the new development bank for a World Bank. There has to be perhaps the first step, a kind of a international payments and messaging system. We'll see that evolve pretty quick. There's going to have to be a clearinghouse, and like the Federal Reserve loans dollars to other central banks when they're in trouble. There's going to have to be something like a clearinghouse, a central clearinghouse. There will be a whole host of institutions that will develop slowly, but not, accelerating and overnight, and not without opposition, and not without periods of slowing and reversal even. Some will join and others will quit, and, this whole process. But as long as the U.S. empire tries to continue using an iron hand against the global South, as it did 40 years ago, the development will be inevitable, I think, where the global South will be going, and that's in the direction of its own institutions. If you look at the U.S. in the 21st century, the leadership has been terrible. I mean, they can't even maintain their own empire anymore. They're shooting themselves in the foot right and left. That's probably because the dumb neocons have gotten into, penetrated foreign policy and are running U.S. foreign policy to a great disaster. We don't have JFKs and even Richard Nixons anymore. We have Trumps and Bushes and people like that. you got to look and shake your head and say, poor USA, where's the leadership, maybe though, and even Biden, Biden still thinks he's in the 1970s and fighting the Cold War. I mean, that's where he comes from, and he's always been a lightweight thinker when it comes to foreign policy anyway. The U.S., I think, will continue shooting itself in the foot, resisting and attacking the BRICS, and that may generate some short-term wins, but in the long run, I think it's going to continue the process of the global South as it industrializes and grows. There's just no way, that's the fundamental economic basis of all this. You would not have the BRICS and you would not have the global South attempting to reassert itself for more of a voice if it wasn't developed economically. The economics drives the politics ultimately in this situation.
What's interesting is with the BRICS discussion that we're having, it's funny because I think Dr. Rasmus and I, the last time we talked, we both acknowledged that during the presidential debates, BRICS didn't even come up at all. It's funny, they would talk all about Israel, they would talk all about Ukraine and Russia. It seems like that's what's so messed up about the American way of thinking, U.S. American. I'm not going to throw all of America under the bus because of the United States of America, but the United States of America, that psyche of, we obviously have interest, and these are for people who say that they don't care about the rest of the world. They have this kind of an isolationist mentality, but you are talking about the rest of the world because you keep talking about we got to bring money back here to help our people out. How is that not an international mindset? You have an international consciousness, even if it's for a selfish reason. So how come you can't see that, importance? But the moderators, no one's going to hold them accountable. But it was interesting how the exclusion of something is probably more important than what they include in the debates and the circus and the sideshow, because I wrote that down. I was like, they didn't mention BRICS one time. They didn't even try to mention it. It wasn't even a part of their agenda. They were more concerned about, is Kamala too Indian? Is she too black? Is she not black enough? And I'm like, are you kidding me? This is where the discourse is, SL. That's what we have to deal with over here, man. We're in some trouble in the United States.
Yeah, it's I don't know. It's that's why I'm not a fan of democracy. Like having millions of people vote, where like half the people cannot read beyond a 6th grade level. It's like, man, just. Like for me, well, I never vote. I've never found a politician worthy of my vote. So, so if we have stupid people elect stupid leaders, what is the point? It's just to give the people like a sense of false, so they feel like they have some say in the running of the country and the world.
Well, all that's true, but ultimately, the public opinion and people, how else can they express their views? By voting for Trump in 2016, they kind of said, "Hey, we don't like where we're going." Of course, they didn't say where they're going. And, if you look in the U.S., particularly among people 35 years or younger, the majority is in favor of socialism. Now, they don't know what the hell socialism is. To them, it means not what we got. That's all it means, right? But public opinion is important. And I think elections, despite all the manipulation that goes on by the elites of elections, the ability to periodically at least express a discontent, a veto, is important. I think defending democracy is important. I think, for example, if censorship continues in the direction it is in the United States, we wouldn't even be able to do this, what we're doing now. right? And Twitter, which is open since Musk, because I've been on Twitter 10 years, and I know what it was like before Musk. I mean, you couldn't even say shit, and you would be, taken off. But today you can. These last vestiges of democracy, whether it's in civil rights and the Bill of Rights, free speech, and so forth, even though they've been circumscribed significantly, I think are still important to defend as much as we can, because without them, we are totally shut down, totally. And they are shutting it down step by step, no doubt about it, ever since George W. Bush and the Supreme Court selected George W. Bush in that election. And then Citizens United and the flood of corporate money that's come in, and then the Zionists and all their flood of money that's come in and bought the Democratic Party lock, stock, and barrel. I mean, these are all negatives. But the negatives, there's still some semblance that should be defended, I think. So I'm a proponent of trying to start where we are and expand democracy. We need to get rid of money in politics if we can. I have no illusions about that. We need to strengthen the opportunity for third parties instead of Democrats going around and denying ballot status to all kinds of third parties. I mean, both parties have debilitated democracy, even electoral democracy in the U.S. in the last couple of decades, and they're continuing to do so. That's part of neoliberalism. You see, to continue their neoliberal economic policies, they've got to shut down democracy as much as they can. That's the political reflection of neoliberalism. And that's going on in the U.S. But, I think we need to vote. There still are opportunities to vote third parties to some extent. And somehow we got to break through the stranglehold of the single party of America, because there are two parties in the U.S. You got to understand this. There's a single party with two wings. One wing's called Republicans, the other's called Democrats, and they're in a political food fight ever since you got Trump, and they're fighting over which direction and how fast you respond to conditions in the country and in the world. And, I would just add that this BRICS thing is going to blow back on the U.S. domestic economy. We've talked about that, Kiko. I think eventually, once it develops, because one of the key institutions that oftentimes is not identified of the empire, we know about the IMF, and we know about the World Bank, and we know about SWIFT, we know about the dollar, but one of the key institutions is what I call the twin deficits. In the neoliberal period, the U.S. has purposely run a massive trade deficit, $1 trillion this year in a trade deficit. That's the difference between exports and imports revenue, right? That creates the trade deficit. The U.S. is not opposed to a trade deficit under neoliberalism. It has encouraged it. And that means the trade deficit means dollars flow more out into the world, but part of the global economy. But part of the arrangement of the twin deficits is that this flow of dollars gets recycled back into the U.S. They buy F-16s and all the investment, in the U.S. A lot of it comes back in the form of foreign governments and banks, private banks, and wealthy in the rest of the world purchasing U.S. treasuries. The purchase of the treasuries has allowed the U.S. to run a massive budget deficit. The trade deficit is financing the budget deficit. And that has allowed the U.S. To spend $8 trillion on wars in the 21st century and to give wealthy capitalists and investors $16 trillion in tax cuts. There's $25 trillion of your $36 trillion U.S. national debt. The budget deficits accumulate into the national debt. So the ability to buy and the encouragement to buy dollars by the global South and to invest back into the U.S. is key to the empire. But it's all based on the value of the dollar. And if you have a BRICS and the BRICS have an alternative currency arrangement, well, then the demand for the dollar is going to decline. If it declines, investors in the rest of the world aren't going to want to buy dollars in order to buy treasuries, because you got to buy dollars first. You can't buy treasuries in Argentine pesos, right? You got to buy dollars. But if the dollar is declining in value because of less demand because of the BRICS alternative currency, then how the hell is the U.S. going to finance its budget deficit and therefore continue the tax cuts and the wars? That's the big blowback that's coming eventually. So you can't separate. This is not just a global economic and political event here. As you've said, Kiko, it's all interconnected domestically and so forth. And at some point, the U.S. empire is going, and the elites are going to have to realize that, this is a threat to the dollar, and therefore running these budget deficits and national debt that we've had, and we're going to have to change. Well, they're not going to raise taxes on the rich and the corporations, and they're not going to stop funding the Pentagon, and they're not therefore going to stop paying bondholders for purchases of treasuries, $1 trillion now a year. And the Congressional Budget Office has estimated it's going to be $1.7 trillion a year going to bondholders, a third of whom are offshore. If we continue this, there's a fiscal domestic crisis brewing in the U.S., and it is tied directly to what's going on with the global empire and the loss and the decline of the empire. I just had to get that in. People need to understand that
I loved it.
As part of the IMF and part of the other institutions, the empire functions this way, and the empire is domestically is not immune from what's going on globally.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's a lot of delusion that government can borrow as much as it wants, and it's as long as the debt is in its own currency. It's just wrong. It's like saying a person can get as fat as he wants. No, you cannot keep getting fatter. It's going to, and then they always would talk out of both sides of the mouth. Okay. So on one moment, they don't have enough funding for the FEMA victims, like in North Carolina, people's homes are flooded and the government has no money because, money's, the money doesn't grow in trees. And then they're like talking about raising the retirement age, slashing the Social Security funds, the Medicare, Medicaid. When they have to slash all those things, they worry a lot about the debt. Okay, and then the moment they raise the retirement age, but 3 months later they will start a brand new war with China. And then they would say, well, we need $400 billion extra this year to fight China, or else we're going to be all living under communism. And then they will find $400 billion in a week out of just like magic, It's such a rigged, corrupt system. But this cannot go on forever, okay? So there's no such thing as free money in the world. Debt is basically your borrowing from the future.
Well, I think it can go on in the U.S. so long as the twin deficit and the recycling of dollars back to the U.S. continues. The U.S. just can create money as much as it wants because that's the global currency. Still weakening, but still. As long as you can finance that debt, in other words, roll over, pay the interest and the principal of that debt, roll it over, the U.S. can continue raising that national debt. But what happens is the interest on that debt becomes onerous, right? Right now, the interest is over $1 trillion a year, according to the CBO, 1.7 trillion as the national debt increases over the decade to 56 trillion from its current 36 trillion. This is government data, by the way, probably a lowball this estimate. But can you keep financing that debt by rolling it over with buying and selling more treasuries is the question here. If you can continue the whole process. If you're not recycling the dollars and borrowing to refinance the principal and interest, well, then you got to increase your tax revenues and you got to reverse all these $16 trillion of tax cuts, or you got to cut your defense spending, $8 trillion. Now, Pentagon's $1 trillion a year. Defense spending in the U.S. is probably 1.3 trillion when you consider the whole thing. As you've intimated, S.L., what's going to happen, and I've been predicting this, we've reached the point with the deficits and the debt deficit this year, 1.8 trillion, and we don't even have a COVID crisis. They're running out of control. What they're going to do, they're not going to raise taxes next year on the rich. Neither wing of the party, single party, is interested in that. We've seen that over the last 4 years. They're not going to cut their war spending and defense spending. They're going to raise that. So where are they going to get it? Well, as you've indicated, S.L., they're going after social programs. That's how they're going to do it, right? And they'll probably try to lower interest rates so they can lower the interest payments. The level of the debt is not the critical variable. It's the ability to finance that debt is the critical variable, and the interest payments on the debt. How high do they get? Because if the interest payments as part of the budget get too high, they got to make cuts in the budget or raise revenues in the budget in other directions. And that's where the crisis is. Do they continue their wars? Do they continue funneling tax cuts to the rich and corporations? Or do they, if they do that, do they go after social programs? There's no other option there. And this is going to be intensified if they can't finance that debt by money flows back into the U.S. economy.
Yeah. And, it's a rigged system, right? It's like saying that all, the animals are equal, but some animals are more equal than others, right? So, like, if you're not living in the U.S., you look at the system and you go, this is freaking rigged. Okay, why should the dollar be more important than other countries? Why should I have to work hard? So, like, if like an American corporation wants 1 million people from India to do the tech support job, right? So these guys have to work 60 hours a week for like one whole year, and then the US just gets to print money, here, click, 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 click on the laptop, and you can create money, and then you pay people. And then as Jack said, a lot of that money has to be recycled back. Okay, so it's like you work for a corporation, as to think of that, right? So you go to work, and then your boss, he gives you the paycheck, and then he says that you have to give me half of your paycheck back to me as a loan, and I'll give you 1% every year. You're like, no, it's my paycheck. I want to have that money. I don't want to give that money back to you, boss, right? So like the whole system is rigged, so corrupt. It's morally wrong, economically wrong, people used to be so scared of debt, okay? So, but throughout the world, great empires went down because of debt. And even after World War II, from 1945 to 1980, the U.S. actually paid down its debt. Okay, so the principal amount of debt that the U.S. owed, but kept falling down. Okay, so can you imagine?
That's why we got neoliberalism, S.L. Neoliberalism signified a change in that. The U.S. decided to run a trade deficit, which allowed it to run a budget deficit. If you look back in 1980, what was the total U.S. national debt? Maybe $1 trillion. In 2000, it was $5 trillion. today, and it's been rising
It's
exponentially
30.
ever since. Today
Yeah,
it's 36 trillion.
yeah.
You
Okay, so
know?
now they just, like make up the rule. Okay, so
Mhm.
the problem in the U.S. is like there's no like compass. Okay, like because everybody is like a salesman, marketing, lawyer. So it's like bullshitting is like the national pastime in the U.S. Okay, so they can argue, oh, there's no such thing as a man. What is the penis? It's nothing. Okay, and then at the next moment, you want, some guy, what does he want to be? He goes, well, I'm a woman. So hold on. 5 minutes ago, you said gender is just a social concept. So it doesn't matter whether he's a man or a woman. So why are you wearing a skirt? Why do you want to be called a woman? Because you just said it's no. So you see what I mean? So like people just but debate on just like meaningless things. So like I show photos of the average American from 1975 to now, 50 years later, and people are so fat, and then one person goes, "Oh, that's fat phobia." Man, you guys are fucking idiots. Okay, so I'm trying to point out to you what went wrong with the American food system. Okay, so it's like a long the conversation about biology, science, nutrition, biochemistry, GMOs, pesticides, fiber, blah blah blah. Okay, but they don't want to discuss that. Like they just shut you down with the one word. You're fat phobic. You know,
Well, well,
so
that
so like people just debate bullshit, and then you just like miss the point. Um, so for example, like the same guys, who say that debt doesn't matter for the U.S., and then you go to like say Financial Times, Wall Street Journal, and they all write articles about Bloomberg, and they all write lengthy articles about how debt is going to collapse China's economy. You know, so like whatever logic, but you cannot just like the fundamentals. So your debt cannot just keep growing. You cannot keep waging wars. You cannot keep getting fatter and fatter every year. You cannot have, like there are like these, fundamentals, truths of life, and you have to stick to that, and then, people, like on social media, people go, oh, who needs, like as I point out to how, say, the steel industry in the UK, it collapsed, and the auto manufacturing industry in the UK collapsed, and it's all because of neoliberalism, Thatcherism, and all that nonsense. And then you will always find somebody argue, we don't need manufacturing. Who needs manufacturing? Let somebody else do it on the cheap. So like this kind of like I mean, so give me whatever topic, and I will argue in well, any point I want. You know, but this kind of stuff is delusional. And then just like there are some solid facts of life about how life works, there are also some basic facts about the economy, right? Because if you can, I mean, create something out of uh, thin air. Okay, that should have a zero value. Okay, that's a fundamental principle of life and economics. You cannot just create stuff out of thin air and say like I can, buy a car with that what it took me, like a 0.01 penny, and I want to buy a $70,000 car. That's just not logical. It's not fair, right? So there are some fundamental principles of the economics, and people keep disobeying that. They keep violating, and they keep trampling upon the foundational uh, uh, laws of nature.
Well,
I'm going to let Dr. Rasmus respond, and then we're going to get to some comments about BRICS and the currency aspect.
Okay.
Of it.
I mean, by the way, I have to drop off in about 10 minutes.
Sounds good.
Well, you know what you're describing, SL, in terms of the cultural issues, whether it's transgender or sexual or fat or whatever, right? This is what has been called wokeism in the U.S. And this is conscious. This is not by accident and evolution. I think the elites, particularly Democrats, have been pushing these kind of issues purposely. And the purpose of that is to crowd out the real economic issues, get Americans concerned about all these peripheral cultural issues, and therefore you don't have to talk about what's going on, with their paychecks and their disposable income and taxes and what you need to do to raise the standard of living that's been falling. Right? This is conscious. This is ideology. Ideology in this sense meaning a falsification and misrepresenting of facts and truth. Right? You create these issues as a great distraction, as I call it. Right? It's not by accident this is going on in the U.S. and the West in particular, and it's evoking a negative response by some people in the population, and in large part of the population, saying, "Hey, wait a minute, you're changing the culture and the values overnight. Elites, we don't necessarily agree with this, right?" So. My only point is this is purposeful. This is not by accident. This is not cultural evolution. This is political strategy. And the media, tied in with these political parties, really pumps this up and pushes this. And that's why there's so much of it in the U.S. and in our elections right now. It's a great distraction, as I call it.
And that's very well said, because and what I try to warn people, wokeism is a thing. There's lots of ways you can take that. Someone that teaches culture and language and stuff like that, when I teach my students that stuff, it never gets to the point that it does in political discourse in this country, because it's not meant to be political in that way. We can respect cultures and different like identitarian type of features, but they actually cause harm and danger to people who want to have like actual like learn about different cultures and learn about our differences. But they politicize it, and that's the danger. When you politicize something, it affects whatever side of the argument you're on. It goes nowhere. It's a huge distraction, like you said. And there's also a danger with you have wokeism and anti-wokeism, which is just as bad, because at that point, it's like the two-party system all over again. This side is arguing this, and this side is arguing that. But you guys are still talking about culture war shit. You're not talking about class war. You're not talking about economic issues. You're talking about identity issues, whether you're against them or for them. It's still a huge distraction when people spend all their time like talking about like against it or for it. Like it's still almost a waste of time at this point.
Yeah. And it's just so much nonsense. Like like people talk about. I mean, the climate change. Like there's no science behind that. And then you look at the U.S. Like people buy like four. The SUVs to one car. Okay, like that's almost a ratio now. Everybody buys huge SUVs, gas guzzlers. And the oil production under Biden, Mr. Democrat, so concerned about CO2 emissions, the oil production in the U.S. has skyrocketed, and it's been going up since like 2014 or so. So for the last a decade, the oil and gas production, they keep going up every year. And the US is number one in the world in terms of oil production. And in terms of the per capita, the energy consumption, the US is about 10 times more than China, and 100 times more than the African nations, you know. So why don't you, you know, and in the wars, okay? So, for example, I mean, like in India, if somebody wants to have fireworks for festivals, people make a big deal about the climate change. Oh, fireworks! No, it's bad for the environment. CO2. And then you have bombing going on in Gaza. Okay, they drop like 20,000-pound bombs to kill. Okay, nobody's talking about the climate change, global warming, when it comes to wars. Okay, and then like you have all these the aircraft carriers and missiles and fighter jets. They produce more emissions than the entire the global south. So there's just like so much hypocrisy, stupidity, because people don't look at the big picture. Like they give you small points, and then the logic seems okay at that point. For that moment, the logic for that. So like that's the essential of the rules based order. Just make up rules as you go along.
SL, if you do have to go soon,
Yeah.
before you drop out, I just want to say thank you for coming back onto the show. Appearance number 7 for Mr. S.L. Kanthan. And for you and Jack, I have all your information in the episode description already, how people can contact you. If people want to, buy your coffee, if people want to check out your works, buy your books and whatnot, I have all the information in the episode description. Make sure you all follow these two gentlemen, S.L. Kanthan and Dr. Jack Rasmus. But we continue, Jack.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you
Thanks,
so
Kiko.
much.
And nice meeting you, Jack.
As well, Sal.
See you guys.
See you. You were about to say something, Jack?
Well, we were trying to talk about the BRICS and the global economy. The cultural issues are not unrelated, obviously. They are, because that plays into the domestic politics response to all of this, and really is the way of ignoring what's going on globally, both in the election and, of course, the elites. Although, as I said before, I think the smartest among the elites know damn well what's happening, and they're plotting and preparing their response, which is going to pretty much become clear. Response to the BRICS pretty much become clear after the November elections, and the circus ends, right? Although it won't end on November 6th. I think.
Oh, there you go with that. Okay.
No,
well,
no.
I have to get your reasons why you think that in a second, but I want to get these few comments out that are related to currency, since you're an economist. Mehdi, shout out to Mehdi, and I'll go back to some previous comments too. BRICS scares the G7 not because of the dollar, but because BRICS is meant to ultimately counter the UN and the G7 control of it. It is about international law and who can hold human rights trials. And then Mehdi also continues, is all done for quick profit. I worked in the industry and watched it collapse. 2 wings in the same bird. I think this person is talking about coding industry, which goes back to this right here. Clinton administration accepted a bag of cash from Chinese middlemen and sold the tech that pushed Chinese ICBM program forward. Wall Street sold our industrial base with NAFTA, learned the code. And then ARMA kind of joins in with that conversation. Based on the dollar to settle international trade, that's what BRICS undermines. Time is against them, which is probably why they're anxious to get war going. And then Mehdi responds, all BRICS has to do is demand that all its exports be paid in a BRICS currency. That's all they have to do. And I'm going to get your response to if that's true or not. That means the U.S. has to convert the dollar to another currency. And as the dollar deflates, it costs us consumers more and more. And then Mehdi continues. The question is, will BRICS crash the dollar or will it let it deflate as other BRICS countries get out from the U.S. dollar? There's a lot going on here with kind of the comments. Thing is, you have to convert that dollar to another currency, and it will cost more and more dollars to pay the conversion rate. So what's your response to those comments by Mehdi?
Yeah, well, there's a lot of comments there, but he's correct about the implications for the demand for the dollar. You know, part of the whole institutional framework of the empire, American empire, is that you got to buy and trade these global commodities, not just oil, but, you know, industrial metals and so on and so forth, and a lot of others commodities using the dollar. That's been the linchpin to the whole thing. And as I said, that ties into, I won't get into it again, about the the recycling of dollars back to the U.S. to maintain budget stability, you might say. Well, you know, think about it. If you're not going to use the dollar, if the BRICS say, we're going to trade in our own currencies, and then we're going to have, at some point, when we get a critical mass of members, we're going to have our own currency, which probably will be a digital currency, I think. I've been saying all along, it'll be digital because digital is harder to interrupt. Long as you have a different currency that you're going to be using to buy and sell things globally, well, that reduces the demand for the dollar to use to buy and sell things locally. And, in 101 economics, when demand goes down, so does the price, right? And the price of the dollar is its exchange rate. So the dollar exchange rate will decline. Well, no one wants to hold an asset, whether it's a currency, the dollar, right, when it's declining in value. I mean, that's just also finance 101, right? You don't buy stock that's falling in price, right? You buy something that you think is going to rise. Well, it's the same thing with the dollar. Global investors won't want to buy the dollars if it's falling and they think it's going to fall further. They'll wait until they think it's stopped its falling, right? So that means if they don't buy the dollars, which you've got to do if you have your currencies in the world, the dollar dominance, you got to buy dollars if you want to buy these goods and services globally in the dollar empire. Right? Mm-hmm. You got to buy dollars. You got to go to global money markets with your currency and buy dollars in order to buy oil, in order to buy aluminum, in order to buy medical goods, whatever. Right? Well, if the dollar's falling, I wouldn't say no one, but the demand's going to decline. If the demand declines, well, then how is the U.S. going to get those dollars continuing to be recycled back to the U.S. to cover the budget deficit? Well, very simply, the Fed's going to have to raise interest rates to attract those foreign buyers into the dollars to buy treasuries, right? They're going to have to do that. Well, that's going to slow the domestic economy down. That's part of the contradictions. You see, the empire's contradictions, neoliberal contradictions, are growing in monetary policy and fiscal policy. We've talked about this, right? As well as now the BRICS represent the contradictions that have occurred in what's called external policy, external neoliberal policies. In my book in 2020 rather, I talked about these four policy areas that are the core of neoliberalism: industrial policies and tax unions and wages and benefits, right? Privatize and et cetera. But neoliberalism is more than that. It's monetary policy, it's fiscal policy, external policy, which is trade and money flows and currencies, right? What we're seeing is the BRICS as a emerging, intensifying contradiction within the external policies of neoliberalism and the empire, right? Just as we are seeing now with the deficit and the budget and the debt, fiscal contradiction, fiscal policy contradictions. They can't keep these tax cuts for the rich going, and they can't keep these wars going because it's going to exacerbate their deficit and their debt and the interest payments on the debt that are now $1 trillion. Monetary policy, the same thing, interest rates and the value of the dollar and so forth. The contradictions are intensifying in the 21st century, and especially since 2008 crisis in neoliberalism, and therefore in the global economic empire. And this is why you see the response of the American elites, not very sharp anymore, to strike out politically, geopolitically, to strike out with their wars and their weaponizing of the dollar with sanctions and so forth. This is all related. You see, you can't separate out these various aspects of the economy, which is the core of the empire. And the dollar, of course, is the linchpin of all that. So everything ties together in economics, and the politics is a reflection of that. You see the intensification of the political conflicts as a consequence of that, and the domestic politics as well as a consequence of that. And then culture follows that. That's the way I look at it. And you've got to look at it in a holistic way, not only economically, but politically and culturally, legally. All that is all related to the system.
And they understand that these elites, they're 100%, they're already, and this is the thing, we get so caught up in, do these people exist or not? And you got people making like their whole careers basically establishing stuff that we already know about. Like, we know that there's a deep state. We know that. I mean, it's not like it's new news, but people will spend years just trying to justify this existence of something that we already know that's around. They don't care it doesn't matter what name you put on it. Like, we know that it's there, but how do we educate the people just like to a certain level? I mean, they're already 10 steps ahead of everybody. They already know the next move that's been made, whether it's another pandemic or whatever it is. They already know. But I can't believe that people just don't question. Like, people are still questioning that those things aren't real things. Like, are you kidding me? Like, how do you not see that this is a control type demolition thing? Like, they can do that. They can if they wanted to. And this is the sad part about the system that we're under right now, which is pretty much a war economy. I don't even know if it's even about humanity, man, because I see all these different, like, whether it's pro-Palestine or whatever it is it just something even beyond that? Because I've never seen this much publicizing of Gaza, for instance, like, because this isn't a new thing. This happened way before October the 7th. The bombardment of Palestine, this has been going on. And now you see all these ads talking about donate to the Gaza Relief Fund and all this stuff. I haven't seen it to this level before. And I'm wondering, like, even on the so-called benevolent side of it, it almost seems like there's still some kind of a weird agenda going on. Like, I can't really put my finger on it.
Yeah, well, conditions deteriorate both domestically and internationally to an extent that it breaks through the ideology, the messaging, the spin. The ideology, the spin, the wokeism or whatever works at a certain level. But when you have instability, both domestically, economically, or wars and so forth, it's not all omniscience. It's not all powerful. It cannot block reality out. People know what's hitting their budgets. They know what's hitting, what's really been happening to their standard of living. They know what's happening to crime, and they know what's happening to, other conditions and that have become issues in the country. So you can't totally control it forever. And, the elite in the U.S. moves from cover issue to cover issue. It was terrorism, and wokeism and so forth. This is all part of their strategies. And there is an elite running the show. It's part bureaucratic, it's part political in the parties, but it's mostly economic behind the scenes, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, just look at the recent data published even in the mainstream media. Harris has raised $1 billion in her campaign in just 3 months. Right? Trump 400 million in just 3 months, July through September, right? And we hear about Musk and Adelson and all those the Zionism and the Zionists on the Democrat side and so forth. So those are the people who really pull the strings behind the scenes, not everyday decisions, but if the political and cultural elites get out of hand, they get them removed, right? I mean, the Don Lemons and others, in the media, they get thrown under the bus when they step too far, right? Say something too much. Fox gets rid of Carlson, etc. Right? I mean, the main directions. They determine the main directions with their donations, and since Citizens United, it's been floodgates have opened for money to run the parties. Not just domestic money, but we see the Zionist money flooding in. They brag, the AIPAC brags $100 million they're spending on just primaries in the U.S., Democrat Party primaries. They're getting rid of anybody in the Democratic Party who even raises the word ceasefire, in Gaza, right? They don't even want that. And that's just the tip of the Zionist iceberg here, funding particularly Democratic Party, but also the Republican Party. So there are elites, in the government, in the bureaucracy, in the political parties, and in the economy, who determine what direction to go, right? And the elites right now, for example, are saying, maybe Project Ukraine is not a good idea.
Mm-hmm.
We seem to be losing despite having thrown $400 billion into this thing, and it looks like the Russians may win militarily. We either have to escalate and risk direct conflict with Russia, or we got to find an off ramp here somehow. And the U.S. elite said, we're not spending any more money on it. You Europeans got to raise the bucks, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there's doubts there. There's still splits within the ruling elite, over this question of, whether they allow Ukraine to send long-range missiles into Moscow or not, right? The neocons want to do that. They say that's the only way to get the Russians to the bargaining table. But the Pentagon is saying, whoa, maybe that don't work, right? You're risking World War III, and the U.S. is not prepared militarily for a direct conflict on the ground with Russia or anybody else in the Middle East, So the Pentagon's holding them back. There are splits within the U.S. elite on all of these issues, not just geopolitical, but domestic issues and what to do and how fast to go in what direction. We are in a very unstable period domestically in terms of the elites knowing what they want to do, and globally, politically, and we see with the BRICS economically as well. They don't have a response yet. But they're going to really intensify the discussion here after the election, which way to go.
Okay, I want to close on that since we seem to have a difference of opinion on that as far as the implications of the election. You've insisted that you don't believe that the election is going to be over after November the 5th. And what goes into your reasoning for that?
Yeah, the reasoning is, look, there's 7 states going to determine the outcome of this, just as there were 7 states in 2016 and 2020. This is the transformation in the political alignments going on. I agree
with that.
After 2008. And if you look at the Democrats and the Republicans, what are they doing? They've raised huge amounts of cash. They are prepared to immediately on November 6th to spend mountains of money challenging the elections in those swing states, which is a signal to me that they aren't prepared. Either one is prepared to accept the results. You won't even hear for sure the final results because the counts may in some states even be suspended.
Oh God, please don't.
Yeah, well, that's what happened in Florida in 2000, but we've got 7 of them potentially here. If the votes are close in those states, you will see challenges, legal challenges, and perhaps even a suspension of the vote count. Right? If it's not close, you will still see challenges that will occur. Also, legal actions against. This election commission went out of its way. It did, in Georgia or Arizona, and went too far, and it prevented people at the polls. There's all kind of arguments, legal arguments they will make, and they are prepared to do so because neither side really wants to accept the outcome of the other. And that's not even talking about what may happen at the electoral college level. Once you get the vote count, it's got to go to the states and their electoral commissions. Got to okay it, right? It can be blocked there. Or even a further step, after the electoral college makes a decision, you still got a period when the electoral college brings its votes to Congress. The president is not really selected until Congress says so on January 6th. And we know what happened on the last January 6th, right? I can foresee all kind of possibilities, interruptions, notwithstanding supposedly the law that was passed to bring some definition to what happens in the electoral college. As long as you got the electoral college and you don't have one person, one vote, you're going to have all these machinations and all these manipulations and all these maneuvers going after the election. And we saw the dress rehearsal in 2020. I can't see that this thing is going to go smoothly this year, particularly if there's close vote counts in a number of those swing states.
Okay, I actually don't disagree with much of what you said. It's simply that you have a different take on it. There are various possibilities. You're right. There's no guaranteed anything. I tell you what I think. I honestly believe, Jack, that it's not going to be a close election. That I'm operating under that premise, and that's the reason why I'm thinking that way. I don't think that the election's close. I'm going to go off on a weird limb and say I believe Trump may win the popular vote. Not even lying. I believe that the Palestine issue itself is going to tank Harris's campaign. It's already had significant effects. YouGov just came out with a poll that Trump is actually leading with Arab Americans, 49% to 47%. And we know that in certain states that can have significant implications. And then not to mention Jill Stein, and you have other people in the race. And something that's pretty perplexing to me, and this is what I'm going to talk about tomorrow on the live stream, is the libertarian flood for Donald Trump. He's gaining with pretty much every demographic you can think of besides white suburban women and black women. Pretty much every other group, he's gained inroads, like significant inroads. And the libertarian vote is really interesting because that's usually the third largest party behind the two parties, if you want to call it a two-party system. The libertarians usually poll after the Democrats and Republicans. I'm surprised that the libertarians that I talk to, they're not even supporting their candidate right now, Chase Oliver. They're all flooding to Trump. And when I saw that, I was like, there's a lot going on here. So really the Democratic base is never Trumpers and some of the traditional Democrats you've had. And I'm kind of factoring that into like this. I don't think it's close because I think the media kind of underestimates his popularity anyway, like at least they have in the last two election cycles. Because even the last time when Biden won, it wasn't as far-fetched as people thought it was. It came down to 45,000 votes in like 3 states. And that's with Biden getting like however many electoral votes he got, 306, however many it was. I just don't think it's going to be a close election. I think that Harris has ran a worse campaign than Hillary. The fact that she won't, or she decided to go into interviews very late in the process, and Biden should have dropped out over a year ago, didn't give her any chance really to recuperate that lost time. I just think that time is against her, and the timing is really against her. And she's really not popular, honestly, with some of the traditional Democrat demographics that you would think.
Well, those are all legitimate points, and you may be correct. We won't know till we see what happens. I think Jill Stein may upset Michigan for her. Jill is running pretty strong in Michigan, and who knows where else. That's sort of a counterpoint to your point about the libertarians. And I think Harris is suffering from what I call the Hubert Humphrey effect. Hubert Humphrey was the vice president of Lyndon Johnson in 1968. Johnson decided not to run. Humphrey ran, but it was the middle of the Vietnam War, and Humphrey simply supported Johnson foreign policy. He supported the Vietnam War, and he lost a close election to Richard Nixon as a result. Supporting the war cost him the election. That's the Hubert Humphrey effect. And what we see with Harris, she's supporting Biden foreign policy, lock, stock, and barrel, right? Whether it's Gaza and Paris and Palestine, or whether it's Ukraine or China or whatever. And I think that's going to cost her a lot of votes. And there are other problems with her campaign. She's kind of blah, Has she really differentiated herself from Biden in a whole number of areas and made it clear that this is a new direction? Because Americans want a new direction here. Right. And they don't hear it really from her. They hear a lot of platitudes and a lot of the same old. And it's not very convincing. And even Trump has been more clever, appealing to working class votes. Some of his proposals, I don't know if he'll deliver on them, but proposals about no taxing of tips, which of course Harris did a Me Too on, but no taxing of overtime pay, which she hasn't, is going to be popular, particularly in some swing states. No taxing of Social Security monthly benefit payments. That's a biggie. A lot of retirees who do vote, are going to look at that, particularly in places like Arizona, Pennsylvania, and say, hey, I like that. By the way, we never always tax Social Security benefits. It was Ronald Reagan who instituted that. He started that. So, it's not sacred that you don't tax Social Security benefits. And by the way, Social Security taxing of benefits does not go into the Social Security Trust Fund. It's the payroll tax that finances that. Not so, if you eliminate taxing of Social Security benefits, doesn't mean it's going to undermine Social Security. It means that the general budget deficit is going to be whacked even further. And then, there's a salt tax, for the middle class, upper middle class. He wants to reinstitute, that tax cut. There's credits for child care. He's really appealing to the working class base, which is very critical in the northern tier states, those three states of, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, where it will really be determined. The four southern tier states, which are Nevada, Arizona, swing states, Georgia, North Carolina, I think he's solid in those states. I think he's going to win those very, very clearly for a number of reasons. So everything's going to come down to the three northern tier states, because if Trump wins the four southern states, he only has to win one northern state to win 207 electoral votes. If Trump wins the four southern states, Harris has to win all three of the northern states to win. I don't think she's going to do that, given the polling and so forth and the nature of her campaign. So it's coming down to those three northern states once again. It was those three states in the 2016 election that really did Hillary in. She didn't even bother going there and campaigning. She thought the working class was in her back pocket, and it wasn't. And that's why she lost 2016. In 2020, Biden turns around and wins those three northern states because you had COVID and no one was going to rallies and, Trump was being blamed for COVID. Well, you don't have the COVID issue anymore. You can't hide behind that. You got to get out and campaign. You can't do it from the basement of your home in Delaware anymore and mail in votes and so forth. It was a very unique situation in 2020, and those unique elements have disappeared. This election is going to look a lot more like 2016.
I know, yeah. I totally agree.
And it's going to come down once again to the three northern states, I believe.
Oh, no, I agree with that, but I just think that I totally agree about the electoral system. We know how the electoral college is. That's why so much money is poured into these so-called swing states. The electoral college creates the swing states. If they simply took away the clause, the all delegate clause, basically in the electoral college, where you don't get every single state vote in that state, it's a state by state popular vote system. But if they took that clause away and did it proportionally, it would be a different situation. But we don't have that, and we know we don't have a national popular vote scenario. But even if they took the clause away from the electoral college system, it would ease it up a little bit more, I think. But they don't want that, because then they would have to campaign every state, every vote would matter if it was a proportional system. And so that's why we have a situation where it's always down to 7 states, 8 states. And but I really don't believe it's going to be close. I think a lot of people are going to be in for a shock. I'm not shocked. I do believe it's going to be more like 2016, and I'm kind of operating under that premise. But from what I've seen, Harris has ran even a worse campaign than Hillary, and I think that the forces against her, like you said, the fact that he's talking about working class issues, these are traditionally things that the Democrats are able to gain over the Republicans, and that's why I've always questioned. I know Trump is a tool, but it's the way he plays the game as a tool is not like other Republicans have played the game. Like, he really is cosplaying like he's a Democrat. I mean, I view him basically as a Democrat. I've always viewed him that way, as a Northeastern type Democrat. He was a Democrat. There's no coincidence that all these people, the Marjorie Taylor Greens of the world, the Lauren Boeberts of the world, the Carrie Lakes, all these people were Democrats at one point. It's not a surprise to me. And then all of a sudden they're far right. I just think it's part of being a tool in the system. These people, they know where they fit in the system, and they know how to leverage that power that they have within this electoral system.
Yeah, well, I've been saying we've been experiencing a slow roll party realignment going on, particularly since 2010 and Citizens United. The Democrats have become the party of big business and the wealthy. I mean, just look at the money they've been raising, $1 billion in 3 months, and then you see characters like Cheney and Bolton and others are joining the Democrats. This is not the Democratic Party of your grandpa. This is a different animal, and it's transformed over the last recent decades, and it's left the Republicans kind of a split. And you got the Trumps and you got the rhinos, right? And the rhinos are moving over, the Romneys and so forth, moving over to the Democrats, because this is the party of empire, right? Very clearly. And it's leaving a kind of a rump Republican that the Trump forces have taken over. That's why they're fighting the Trump forces so aggressively. They, meaning the mainstream party. And if Trump is defeated, you will see, a solidification of the party realignment into a true single party with a very rump Republican opposition here. So that's what's happening, in late neoliberalism here on the political level and in these elections, which you can see beginning to occur after 2012, after the 2008 crisis. Things began to change economically and politically in the country, very, slowly and so forth. But now we can see it even more clearly of a party realignment. The Democrats are a different animal than what they were. They are the guardians of the empire and of the super rich. And the Republicans, they have their capitalist influencers and contributors too. I'm not saying they don't, but it's like two different animals now fighting it out, and that's why they're fighting. If they hadn't transformed and changed so much, there would be more cooperation between them. It would be like a 2000 election, right, where even though there was some question of who won that, the Supreme Court selects George W. Bush, and Al Gore just throws in the towel, in 2004, Kerry throws in the towel in Ohio and so forth. I mean, they cooperated. The understanding was, well, we alternate every 4 or 8 years, right? Well, they're not cooperating so much anymore. They're more intensely fighting. It's part of the contradictions and part of the money corruption going on in the U.S., not just domestic money, but foreign money now has penetrated the political system and the elections to an extent never before. George Washington would be turning over in his grave, who warned us against foreign influence in the politics of the country here way back in its origins. Well, we're seeing that now. We're seeing that very clearly now in a way that was never even envisioned. But, I think you may be right. It may turn out to be, if it's close, then you will see the shenanigans.
I agree with that. I agree with that totally.
But, even if it appears to be close, the shenanigans will start. Like in Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania will be determined by what happens in Philadelphia. Right? That's the base, the big population base of the Democrats. If they can turn out enough votes in Philadelphia, they can offset the votes in the rest of Pennsylvania that will go Trump. So, the whole idea will be to emphasize the votes, let's say, in Philadelphia, maybe overcount them, and then the rest of the cities to see if they can undercount them. The election may come down to one state and even one city. Who knows? That's a possible scenario here. But we will see. You may be right. I will still hold by my view, and I hope I'm wrong, that what we'll see is political and legal manipulations that will suspend the vote outcome. And that will have tremendous negative consequences for the U.S. economy and investment and so forth.
Yes, it will. And before we go, I wanted to just give a shout out to all the people who were in the comment section, Armor 15, Prester John, and we had a couple other people, Maddie, Voices of Poverty. Shout out to everyone that was in the chat. And I wanted to know if you had any concluding statements on BRICS going forward. Anything that we didn't talk about during the 16th BRICS Summit in Kazan, Russia, and how can people get in touch with you in case they had a question or a comment?
Yeah, well, I think I've kind of stated my various views on the institution of Bretton Woods and how the BRICS were challenging this. It's a go slow thing. The dollar isn't going to collapse overnight. It's not going to disappear overnight. We're going to be in an extended period of both systems cooperating and competing together over time. It remains to be seen whether the U.S. elite can smartly confront the BRICS or whether the neocons will continue influencing U.S. foreign policy in a very aggressive, intimidating way. That remains to be seen. I don't know how that's going to turn out, but basically, as I said at the beginning, the BRICS represent a situation of potential dual authority, dual power within the system. And dual power is always an indication of competing institutions, right, to the formerly established institutions. That's an anteroom to revolutionary change. I'm not talking about political revolutions here now. I'm talking about economic revolution here. That potentially the BRICS represent if it pans out. It won't be a smooth trajectory. There will be periods of gains and retreats, and though some will join, some will drop off, and so forth. But as long as the economic underlying conditions continue and prevail, I think the momentum and the direction will continue. But it's not going to happen overnight. The dollar isn't going to collapse. The empire isn't going to collapse overnight. But it's going to be a period of competition for the rest of the decade, certainly. Where you can reach me, last point, as you said at the introduction, I have a radio show, Alternative Visions, on the Progressive Radio Network every Friday at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. You can catch me there where I talk about issues of the prior week. You can follow me on Twitter at Dr. Jack Rasmus, where I comment several times a day on issues of the day. Follow my interviews and my article writings on my blog, jackrasmus.com. Those are the three areas you can follow me. And stay tuned for my next book that comes out in March of next year, called The Twilight of American Imperialism, which looks at the whole history of U.S. imperialism from its very origins, which I indicate as 1768, when it was still colonies, up to the present, how that imperial thrust of the system has evolved and changed over time to the very present.
Well, congratulations on the upcoming book. We can't wait to read and purchase that book and promote it for you. That's exciting news. And again, to check out Dr. Rasmus's other productions and books, I'm going to link all the information in the episode description. He has a wonderful website, drjackrasmus.com. And beautiful people, I'm going to do a live stream probably tomorrow. And then we have election night coverage 2024, November the 5th, which we're not even going to talk about the election. Honestly, I'm going to give people just heads up. It's really more of a way we're going to promote the channel. We're going to have a full cast of people on. We need to think about organizing just outside of election cycles. We have to think about being proactive all the time and not wait for these people just to give us the crumbs. I mean, we have to do things, whether it's just for our own peace of mind or whatever it is. We can't just let these people watch their show. We have to create our own shows, and we have to do our own thing in our own lives. Beautiful people, enjoy the rest of your day, and we will talk soon. Cheers, everybody.